So as we head into the 99-2000 season, things are changing, and things will continue to change. We're into a bruising, punishing big man's league. And that bruising, punishing style means that some careers are going to get shortened. That being said, the top 10 that year, according to the Hockey News, are Jaromir Jagr at 1, Peter Forsberg at 2, Paul Kariya at 3, Chris Pronger at 4. He's fantastic at that point. Number 5, Mike Modano. Number 6, Nick Lidstrom. Number 7, Pavel Bure. Number 8, John LeClaire. Number 9, Eddie Eagle Belfour. And number 10, Eric Lindros. And Lindros misses a lot of time that year due to concussions. And we're starting to talk about how, hey, we're not sure about concussions. And in the annual I used for this, they say, doctors are saying we don't understand the long-term ramifications of concussions and we're concerned. Of course, now it's, almost 20 years later, and we're starting to understand the long-term ramifications of concussions. They're nothing to mess with. Even though how they occur, what kind of a hit it takes to actually get a concussion, that's still an open discussion, and that's still something they're investigating. Because, again, with the brain, there's a lot of mystery there, and they're still not 100% sure on how to fix it. But when people talk about how the game, there's not enough hitting anymore, and, it's not as good as it used to be, I remember a lot of careers being shortened and really big name players being absolutely flattened. And so when I see people saying, so-and-so hit this guy and he shouldn't be allowed to hit that guy because he's a star, back then that wasn't a thing. Technically, you weren't supposed to hit the big star players, but if you had a chance, if he has his head down, you can absolutely drill him. And that's how Scott Stevens made a living for a good portion of his career there. It was legal. It was above board. It was fine. And it's part of the reason why the game has changed as much as it has. Because we look back on those incidents, and they're ugly. As much as at the time we're like, wow, what a hit. There was still that voice in the back of your head that went, but that shouldn't be legal. Anaheim, they're 4 points out of the playoffs that year. They have no scoring depth. So again, we're stuck with Selanne, Kariya, and what else? Not enough. So you're wasting some of the best years of Kariya's career and of Selanne's as well. And at some point, Kariya is going to walk, and that's going to be a real shame. The Thrashers win 14 games as an expansion team. Considering the roster they had put together, that's miraculous. And Patrick Stefan, in his rookie year, 5 goals, 25 points. Yeah. And they talk about how he'll get better. Yeah, he'll get better, but not a lot better. Boston, 24 wins. It is a miserable year. I was a miserable human being that year. That was a tough one for me. Raymond Bourque gets traded to Colorado. Made it even tougher. There's a lack of depth and there's iffy goaltending. Byron Dafoe, who has one of the greatest masks in history when he played for Boston, his Kings mask was fantastic as well. But Dafoe's the starter, and I'm not going to put it on Dafoe, but there just wasn't solid enough goaltending. They had Rob Tallis play for a while that year, and John Graham was in there for a while that year. And Tortorella will tell you, Graham's a nice guy. He said that years later. But Pat Burns really didn't have anything to push towards the playoffs with. This was a pretty bad Bruins team. Really, in all honesty, pretty bad Bruins team. Buffalo. Hasek is limited to 35 games due to injury. So with Hasek out, that hurts Buffalo. It means that Marty Biron comes up and they get a good picture of the future with Biron, and they feel pretty good about him as a goaltender, but Hasek being out hurts. They add Dougie Gilmour at the trade deadline, and while they don't have a fantastic year, Gilmour scores 17 points in 11 games after being added from the Chicago Blackhawks by Buffalo. So Gilmour seems to be happier in Buffalo than he was in Chicago. He's not going to be a Sabre for very long, but still, that's an impressive run for him. Calgary, in the midst of a bad season, Freddie Brathwaite has a career year. The team's bad. They're wearing the horsehead jerseys now as their thirds, and they're beautifully ugly is the way I put it. You're not going to see them in the countdown because the one that I have is all ratty and torn up, and I need a new one. But they're not easy to find, and they're not cheap. But Freddie Brathwaite, career year, and then during the summer, they bring back Mike Vernon. So it's, thanks for all your help, Freddie, but we know that long-term, you're not going to be our starter, So we're going to look to the past with Vernon and see if we can spark something here. And Calgary's kind of spinning their wheels at this point. It's going to get better, we know that, but at this point, it's not. Ray Bourque is added, as stated before. The Avs lose to the Stars in the playoffs. Game 6, a chance to send it to overtime, or was it Game 7, a chance to send it to overtime, and Raymond Bourque hits the post. So Bourque, a playoff performer, a clutch guy, and his first playoff run with Colorado, the guy hits the post. It was that kind of season for Bourque. It'll get better the next season. Forsberg misses 33 games. So I mentioned Lindros with injury problems. Forsberg has injury problems as well. When he plays, he's fantastic, but he's playing not as regularly as Colorado would like. Columbus joins the National Hockey League. Doug MacLean is in charge of building a roster from scratch, and Rostislav Klesla, or Rusty Klesla as he becomes known, is their first draft pick, their first draft in the National Hockey League. So Columbus, you're now on the board. Detroit, Osgood, he's solid, and I liked Osgood, but the criticism was always there. Yeah, he's good, but wait for that bad goal. That bad goal's coming. It's coming. At this stage, he had 196 wins for Detroit. But you'd still hear about how, we don't know, maybe. Manny Legacy is sitting on the sidelines waiting for his chance to get in there. And Osgood just doesn't get the respect. And then when they lose to the Avalanche in round 2, a lot of that is, well, yeah, but they have Patrick Waugh and the Red Wings have Osgood. So clearly, if you're going to compare him to Patrick Waugh, yeah. But Osgood was still a pretty good goaltender. He had a .910 save percentage that year, which is right around league average, I believe. The Oilers, really strong year for Tommy Salo. They make the playoffs. They're out in the first round again. And then Glenn Sather, he runs off to New York because he's going to win Stanley Cup, spending all of New York's money. And Kevin Lowe is in as general manager. McTavish is in as coach. What can go wrong? You've got these two young guys, both 41 years of age at the time they come in. They're both former Oilers from the glory years of the 80s. This can only go in a good way. I look forward to talking about the Oilers and all the Stanley Cup wins that these former guys from their dynasty bring to the city in future videos in this countdown. And not countdown, it's a history set playlist. You know what I mean. Yeah. Florida, 98 points. 98 points. Great season. Bure, 58 goals. This is a fantastic Florida Panthers team that gets swept by New Jersey in round 1 and scores a grand total of 6 goals in 4 games. And 3 of those 6 are scored in game 1. It is a really big wake-up call that something needs to be done with Florida. They're not going to end up being a regular playoff powerhouse. Those 98 points, great season. Fantastic. Best season they'd ever had to that stage. And it would all go backwards from there. The really important thing that year was they kept Pavel Bure healthy. So Bure avoiding missing a lot of time with injury plays a big role in the team being much better. Bure is a one-dimensional player. You'd have to introduce him to his goalie at the end of the year because he's never met him. But he's still number 7 on that list because that one dimension he brings is so good. Kings. The Kings make the playoffs, but they're swept in round 1. And there's some fingers pointed at their goaltending tandem of Stefan Fiset and Jamie Storr. Both given the chance to take over as the starter. Neither of them show that ability. Jamie Storr is supposed to be the goalie of the future for the LA Kings since they drafted him in the first round, pretty high up. And it's just not quite clicking. So they know they need some help. They know they need that in net. And they're going to continue searching for that. Minnesota. The quote about them in the Hockey News Annual I used for this, they will pick first in 2001. I would answer that with no. 2001, they actually picked 6th. Minnesota was a better team than they got credit for. Columbus went more with the veteran roster, and Minnesota went with the younger roster and the more unproven, lesser-known players. But with Jacques Lemaire as coach, they're going to be good. And Marian Gaborik was their first ever draft pick. But Jacques Lemaire with his defense, kind of choke the life out of the game kind of style, it absolutely makes Minnesota better than they should be as an expansion team. Montreal, they missed the playoffs, but guess what? Jeff Hackett is really good. Jeff Hackett has another really good season, below 500 in net because he's playing in Montreal, but it again shows that he was good on bad teams. And how bad was this team offensively? their leading scorer is Martin Rucinski with 49 points. I know this is a low-scoring era, but 49 points is not enough. And when Rucinski's your number one scorer, Hackett must be playing great for your team to win as many games as you are. Nashville wins 28 games their first year, and they win 28 in their second year. So, you look at this two ways. They don't advance from their first season in the NHL, or they don't regress. The San Jose Sharks had a solid first year and then regressed in year two. Tampa had a hard time making that step forward coming out of their expansion year. So for Nashville, it's nice and steady, and they just need offense. But in net, they're solid. They have Dunham and Vokoun as their tandem. Vokoun will emerge as a starter soon. But Dunham is not a bad goaltender for them, and they really do not have a problem in the net. Their problem is putting the puck in the other net. New Jersey, of course, they win the Stanley Cup, and they do it with more offensive flair than they did in '95. There's less of the whole trapping thing, and there's more flow to the game. Larry Robinson behind the bench makes a big difference. Remember Robbie Ftorek? He's gone. Robinson takes over before the playoffs, reluctantly it would seem. He's a good coach. Larry Robinson is a very good coach, but he seems to be more comfortable as the assistant, giving ideas rather than being the guy in charge as the head coach. But it works in those playoffs. So this is one of those situations where Lou Lamoriello down the stretch goes, all right, and switch. We're going to get this guy out as coach and put that one in, and it works. And so Lou does it again. He puts himself behind the bench at one point too, does Lou Lamoriello. But this season it's Larry Robinson. It works out really, really well. Okay, Islander fans, plug your ears for the next little bit here. 24 wins again. That's an impressive back-to-back record right there. So Nashville with 28 back-to-back, and the Islanders with 24 back-to-back. One team is happy with their progression. The other one, stalled. Absolutely stalled. But on the good side, they draft first overall. However, they draft Rick DiPietro, which means, hey, we can trade that Luongo kid. We don't need two future number one goalies. We're going to go with DiPietro. Which at the time, a lot of people say, this is a bad idea. But Milbury goes, hey, it's my idea, so it's a Milbury idea. And so he trades Luongo. Charles Wong buys the team. And that adds some financial stability. And even though we'll still hear rumors of the team being moved, and their attendance that year was below 10,000. Below 10,000 fans a game paid. That's not attending, that's paid. And so they get an owner that says, I'm going to stay here. And this is despite a team that also only has 220 goal scorers. It is an abysmal time. And those 220 goal scorers included Mariusz Czerkowski with 35 and Brad Isbister with 22. Czerkowski and Isbister are their best scoring forwards. It's amazing they got 24 wins that way. It's a rough time for some of these teams. This is why, if you look at these seasons, you look at some of these really bad teams, just think, with the salary cap, the Islanders would have been forced to spend money and forced to have good players on their team. Selling guys off wouldn't have been an option. Now, yes, that could have meant a move, but more likely, it would have meant being smart and just running the team better. And your attendance would have gone up because the team wouldn't have just been constantly selling off players. The Rangers, 29 wins. They fall to 23rd overall. Yesterday's video, they were 18th. So they're getting worse. What do? They bring back Messier. All right, guys, here's what we're going to do. Mark's back. He's been gone for 3 years to Vancouver. He was exiled to the wilds of western BC, but he's back now. Here we go. And they also added Vladimir Malikov on a huge contract. This team thinks that they're close. And Glenn Sather now has Rangers money to do what he said he could do, which is I could build a cup champion with the Rangers money. Okay, here we go. So yeah, the Rangers are still trying to buy their way back into the playoffs. And we'll see as these videos go along how that goes for them. Ottawa, Yashin holds out. Yashin, I'm not playing until I get a better contract. And the Senators tell him to go pound salt. So he does. He leaves. And so Yashin doesn't play the whole year. Ottawa regresses in the standings. And they're out in the first round. But you know what? They have a good year. Radek Bonk makes that next step with him out. Bonk ends up with 60 points that year. And he played pretty darn well. The tricky part for Ottawa is goaltending. Patrick Lalime ends up being the starter kind of by default. Ron Tugnut's traded off to Pittsburgh around deadline time. And Barrasso's brought in. Well, Barrasso is basically done at this stage. So Lalime's the starter, and while he has an amazing mask, one of the best masks in history, he is seen as a starter that's a step below other starters in the league. And the feeling is that kind of shows up in the playoffs. Philly. Lindros plays 55 games in the regular season and 2 in the playoffs. And this is where we start seeing those ugly hits. A wobbly Eric Lindros looking dazed and confused, being dragged off the ice. And it's not a good look for the NHL. And the NHL knows this. The Players Association knows this. It is alarming how long it has taken for them to take action about this kind of thing. But they'll tell you it's part of the game. Concussions are definitely taking their toll on Eric. And yet, with Lindros only playing 2 playoff games, they make the Final Four. This team overachieves. The Flyers absolutely overachieved in 99-2000 and left its fans thinking, you know what, we're still close to a Stanley Cup. Because that year it appeared that they were close. They lose out to the Devils in that conference final, but it's a good series. And the perception is that they're close. And if Lindros had been able to play, if he wasn't injured, maybe they win the Stanley Cup that year. Phoenix, they're out in round 1 again. Dating back to when they were the Winnipeg Jets, they've now been eliminated in the first round 10 times in a row. They're sick of it. Absolutely sick of it. And the pressure's on Roenick now to step up. That, okay, now we've got to get more out of Roenick. The thing is, it's just they're not good enough as a team. Now, Habby Bulin, the Bulin Wall, is fantastic. And without Habby Bulin, this team, I don't even know if they make the playoffs. But there is a lot of talk about how things are going. Gretzky's now a part of this organization. He had a 20% ownership stake in it. And, of course, he's going to end up being the coach. And the idea being, Gretzky, name recognition. The name recognition is part of it, but also the idea of, hey, this guy won Stanley Cups. He's played a lot. He's the best player in the history of the game, arguably. Okay. Arguably the best player in the game. I would say that he is, but I can understand why other people would disagree with that. And Phoenix brings him in, and it makes total sense that you would look to a player like that to drum up interest locally and to try to turn around the fortunes of your team. Pittsburgh. Ivan Holinka's the 3rd coach this team has had in a year. Yep. It's turmoil, and yet the team's playing relatively well. They make it to round 2, which, considering how spotty this lineup tends to be at this stage, is pretty good. They had a poor power play, though, because they had no power play quarterback. Their power play ranked near the bottom. They had a 15.6 power play. That percentage being the lowest they'd had since, expansion area kind of thing. So this is a team that bafflingly has problems on the power play, even though you got Jaromir Jagr on it. So Pittsburgh has some underlying problems, which are being hidden by the fact they keep making the playoffs. They're staying in the mix. They're playing relatively well, but you can see there's a market adjustment coming for them. St. Louis, 114 points, President's Trophy. That can only mean good things, right? And Roman Turek has 42 wins in his first year in St. Louis. This Dallas fan was like, I knew he was going to be good. And Turk's masks are fantastic. While we're talking about masks, Turks are great. Eventually, at some point, I'm going to need to do a countdown of what I think were the best masks I ever saw. Turk would be in there. They're out in the first round against San Jose. Yep. President's Trophy, great team, fantastic lineup, top to bottom, and out in the first round. It's something that has happened with St. Louis, where they have really good regular seasons, and then it just falls apart in the playoffs. Them winning the Stanley Cup in 2019 caught a lot of people off guard because of this. It's not a lack of faith in the current organization or current players. It's history. We've watched this team's history, and we've seen them put some pretty good teams on the ice that just fail in the big games, as this one did as well. Speaking of San Jose, they do have another first-round upset, so chalk one up for them. However, they've never been above 500. So what those playoff upsets hide is the fact this team has never been very good. And it's kind of strange when you look at that, because you would think, well, they keep getting out of the first round and being in the final 8, so they must be pretty good. No, not really. So once they get to that second round, the problems that cause them to be a sub-500 team show up, and they end up getting eliminated then. But they're a pretty good playoff team. They're just not a very good regular season team. Those things do happen. Those things can be and that would be an interesting video too, to talk about teams that finish low and do well in the playoffs. It's strange, but San Jose is going to change that narrative as this series goes along. Tampa Bay, hey look, 19 wins again. See, this is what happens when you say, our team's not going to be last again. The hockey gods hear you and go, yeah, they are. In fact, multiple seasons, a pox on your houses. 19 wins, and that's 3 straight years of 50-plus losses. And Tampa's still showing up to watch games. We talk a lot about fandom in the South and how it's not hockey. No, they don't watch hockey down there. Tampa will show up and support. Now, there's talk at the time about how Tampa's papering the arena. And what that means is they're giving tickets away. There's people outside handing tickets away so that the arena's full, but they may not all be Lightning fans. Regardless, they managed to keep their attendance numbers pretty solid. I've never heard anything about Tampa being in trouble and potentially moving. I've never happened. And I don't think they always get the credit for that either. The thing with Tampa that year too is they made a ton of trades, just to try to get better. And the trades don't make any difference. It's just rearranging all. It's just shuffling the cards and just crap hands all around for this team. So Tampa's still having problems. Toronto, 100 points for Toronto. Pretty sure that was the first time they ever reached 100 points. And the team is seen as too soft for the playoffs. Stop me if you've heard this before. So the team gets eliminated from the playoffs. They watch Dallas and New Jersey play a very heavy game in the Stanley Cup Finals, and they say, we need to be that way. So they go out in the offseason. They sign Gary Roberts. They sign Shane Corson to add some sandpaper to that lineup, make things a little tougher up front. The other problem they have is their blue line is good, but it's not great. They don't have that big name on the blue line. They don't have the depth on the blue line that they need. And it's seen that their blue line and their team being soft is a reason why they're not advancing very far in the playoffs. So again, if anybody's heard this before with the Toronto team, put your hand up and then feel silly because I can't see you. Vancouver, 25-point improvement, but they still don't make the playoffs. This is how crap they were. They had 58 points the year before. They had 83 the year after. They still missed the playoffs. That's Messier's last year. Now, I'm going to give Messier some credit here. That last year in Vancouver, he was actually okay. I thought of his 3 years in Vancouver, that third year, I thought it was his best. But when he's out, Canuck fans are glad to see him out the door, to be honest. And Felix Potvin comes over during the season. Goalie of the future, here we go. He's our guy. Burke traded out and traded in goaltenders a lot. So Kevin Weeks was brought in from Florida. He's the guy. Doesn't win a game that first year he's in Vancouver. And then he starts playing relatively well. And then he's gone. Potvin's in. And we'll see how long Potvin lasts. But it's still a time of turmoil for Vancouver, and what would become the West Coast Express starts to form. With Morrison joining the team, Bertuzzi at 25 goals, and Marcus Naslund is starting to build a pretty good resume as a goal scorer in the NHL. It's just you don't hear a lot about it outside of Vancouver because the team is still basically a mess. And finally, the Capitals. At the end of October, they sat 14th out of 15 teams in the Eastern Conference. That's pretty miserable, right? That's a pretty poor record. They rallied to a 102-point season that year. And then they were out in round 1. So they're almost the best team in the East during the regular season. And then when it comes to postseason, they're out in the first round. Washington went through this a lot. Good regular seasons, underachieving in the playoffs, and it didn't end until 2018. So unfortunately, when I go through this series, there are some teams that it's going to feel like, hey, this is a beat we saw before in this series. Yep, and we'll see it again with the Capitals. But for today, you guys are caught up in the 1999-2000 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.